Greetings, this is part 2 of my Amiga 500 rebuild. My SCART to HDMI video converter has just arrived, so let's take a look at it. I'm going to be tearing it down and hardwiring it direct into the Amiga. So this nice little box, it's got SCART input, it's got a HDMI input, it's got a HDMI output. You can switch between the HDMI input and the SCART input, and you can choose 720 or 1080p, and is powered from 5 volts. It also has a bit of a rattle, so I don't know what's broken inside it, what's come loose. Hopefully just a little bit of plastic from the casing or something like that. So the first thing I'll be doing is tearing it apart. Okay, so getting into this is pretty straightforward. 4 screws under the feet underneath, and that's all. Okay, let's see what is inside. Whoa, a bit gnarly. What do we have? We have a lump of dried glue, which is what was rattling, I hope. That's the only loose thing, that's good. We have 2 chips, CAT 6612CQ. It connects into that HDMI output, so that'll be the encoder of some form. An anonymous chip here, where they have quite handily laser etched out all the text. So you can still make out some bits of it where it's not been laser etched quite deep enough. Can't make out enough on there to work out what that is offhand. But that comes from the HDMI and the SCART by the looks of things. So that'll be doing all the video re-encoding, and that'll just be creating the HDMI output. That all looks fairly simple and straightforward. Remove this from here. Nothing amazing on the bottom, but that should looks like it should be fairly simple and straightforward to fit in. These capacitors are a little bizarre. We've got small 0.1 inch pitch capacitor footprints with massive 0.2 inch pitch capacitors put into them, with lumps of hot glue to hold them in place. And these are all 220 microfarad 50 volt ones. I suspect that they basically run out of the 220 microfarad 6.3 volt ones, which is what you'd only need for here because it's only a 5 volt supply, and just slapped in any old 50 volt ones they happen to have lying around, and then just smothered them in hot snot to stop them from flapping around too much, which of course has failed because they just flap around now. So maybe I should replace these capacitors whilst I'm doing the job with lower voltage ones that are much neater and less prone to breaking off. Then, because I don't have a SCART connector and I don't have a 23-pin D connector either, I'm just going to remove this SCART connector completely, I think, and then hardwire, solder in wires from this board straight into the underside of the Amiga board. And then we shall see if I can get an image out of it. Okay, that looks a little better now, I think. Right, now we can have a proper look at the board. What have we got? We've got, on this side here, we've got a bank of voltage regulators. We've got a 3.3, 2 1.8 volts and a 2.5 volt. Over here we've got another 3.3 volt to provide all the various different voltages that the main chip, which I still can't identify because the laser etching has just wiped it all out. It looks like there's a big A and a T there, so it might be an Atmel, or it might be a clone of an Atmel. Either way, it's just going to be a generic ARM-based SOC. Switching power supply over here for the main voltage. This chip here is an HDMI transmitter. Basically, it's the chip here does all the processing, sends the data to this chip here, which then sends it out through HDMI. We've got a little Atmel EEPROM, we've got a WinBond flash chip, and F01, which I have no idea what it is, but it could be a FET, could be in a little voltage regulator, could be anything really. My money's on a FET. And that really is the entirety of the board. Video signals come in, get processed, get converted to HDMI and sent back out again. As simple as that. So now I shall remove this chunky connector and then see about wiring it into the Amiga.
2 hours later.
Right, I've wired in this SCART to HDMI adapter now. It's a bit Heath Robinson at the moment. I will be changing the wiring, but this is just a proof of concept to show that it's working. The way that I've done it is actually using this, or a variant of this schematic, link in the description. I'll put it up here as well, by Ian Steadman. It's pretty straightforward, but there are a couple of little curveballs about SCART that I didn't know about, especially with regards to RGB. You've got your 3 RGB connections, fair enough. The sync connection is pin 20, which is this purple one here on this drawing. Needs to go through a small resistor. He's got 330 ohms on here. Apparently anything from 270 to 510 ohms is fine. I've got a 470 on there. There's 2 other connections as well. The first one here with a 1k ohm resistor in it, that goes to pin 8 of the SCART and comes from the 12 volt supply. Now the purpose of that one is to automatically switch over to the SCART connection when you turn the Amiga on. I don't need that, it's just going to permanently on SCART, so I'm not bothered with that connection. The other one is this orange one. That's the one I really did not know about and threw me for a while when I just wired it up because I didn't have that connection. That connection, which goes to pin 15, sorry, pin 16 rather, on here it switches the SCART from composite to RGB mode. That needs another small resistor in it. He's got 75 ohms on his. This comes from the 5 volt supply of the Amiga. So that goes through to pin 16 through a 75 ohm resistor. Anything from 47 to 270 apparently is okay. So I've used a 220 because it's just what I happen to have. So yes, I've sort of wired that up. There are other bits of connections on here which I haven't got. There is a pass-through of the composite if you want it. I'm not bothered with that one because there's no need for it. I haven't wired in the audio connection yet either. They'll come later on once I've actually got some audio to test with. But for now I'm just interested in getting a colour picture. So I'll show you how I've actually wired it in. Let's zoom in on this so you can see it. Now the RGB signals and the sync signals actually go through a little collection of ferrite beads here, and that's really convenient because in between each pin of them is a ground connection. If I turn this over, you can see where I've wired this in basically to the underside of the ferrite beads, with the signal on the connector side, the 23 pin connector side, and I've actually used coaxial cable here, and the shield of it I've got connected to the ground point, sorry my hand's in the way, the ground point in between each of the ferrite beads, just to keep the ground as close as I can to the signal. Those then go through, I've got the red, green and blue sync signal and that's the 5-volt signal to switch to RGB mode. Just coming straight through to the SCART connector, or where the SCART connector used to be. The resistors I've just got wired straight in here at the moment. Not 100% happy with it, but it does the job for the moment. What I will also need to do when I've finished the power supply is route the 5 volts straight through to the power input on here, so I don't have to use an external power. So let's plug this in and we shall see it working. We need power for the converter. We need HDMI signal. And let's come up and see the screen here. No signal at the moment. Then power for the Amiga. Fingers crossed. Plug it in. We get a white screen, it goes brighter. SCART 1080p 50 Hz. Yes. There's our nice purple workbench logo. Excellent. So now I need to clean up this wiring, find some way of perhaps mounting the board, and sort out the power supply when my 12 volt inverting adapter finally arrives from China. Still en route at the moment. So yes, that'll be the next stage, is power supply, clean up the RGB connections, mount the board. I'm wondering about mounting it here, either over the video circuitry here, or maybe actually underneath the circuitry. It might be easier underneath. We've got these pretty large capacitors here. Let's just disconnect this. But I was thinking about the possibility of mounting it here, which would give a reasonably low profile, give it nice edge profile to it. There's no screw holes conveniently lined up, unfortunately. There's one which is sort of offset here, which would push it in a bit, but I'm sure I can either 3D print something or just glue some standoffs in the right places to attach it to there, so that the HDMI output is in a nicely located position. In other news, for the floppy drive, I was thinking of just using a PC floppy drive, but in hindsight that's going to be awkward because I've got no actual Amiga discs at the moment. I've got the Claranto Amiga Forever CD with licensed copies of Workbench and Kickstart ROMs and everything that I'd need, but of course that's just images, and that's pretty useless to me with a floppy drive, and I've got no way of getting those images onto an actual physical floppy. So a friend of mine actually recommended I get a Gotek floppy emulator, and there's a different version of the flash that you can install on it, of the firmware on it, that gives you full floppy emulation for the Amiga. So I'm going to give that a go. I've got one of those on order from China. It's going to take a while to get here. Last I saw it had just left Shenzhen, so a few weeks that should arrive. I shall then be attempting floppy emulation on my Amiga and trying to get the machine to actually boot. I think that's about it for now. I'll be back next week with another update. I've been Matt and you've been wonderful.